I saw something crouched in the road driving around one night. Its eyes glowed when my headlights hit it, so I assumed an animal of some sort. But when I got within 15 feet of it, it stood up and looked like a girl standing there. I slammed on my brakes immediately, but suddenly the road was just empty. My friend in the car hadn't seen anything, but asked me a few minutes later if it looked like a girl. He'd apparently seen something similar with his sister a few weeks before in the exact same spot. When I was in El Salvador, we went to visit my grandpa up on the mountains there. There were a lot of rumors that a dried up stream next to my grandpa's house was haunted, and that you could hear the cries of the dead and see the devil walk there at night. I didn't think much of it. The day we had left really late from the city, and to get there we had to walk because there weren't many roads to drive. So we finally make it. It's about 2 in the morning. My grandpa is about to open the door to the house, and we turned off the lamps. My eyes are getting used to the darkness, and you could see the stream. It was dried up so you could see the rocks and the mountains because of the moonlight. Anyway, I'm just looking around and I suddenly see this figure by a tree. I'm thinking, well, it's probably a drunk guy. But then that crap did something, and it stood tall as F and went blacker than the night itself. Started doing some sort of movement from left to right. I couldn't believe it. So I touched my cousin, and I tell him, hey, do you see that on the tree? He's like, whoa, and flashes the light. There was nothing there. Throughout that night, I felt unease. I fell asleep later that morning around 5 a.m. A bunch of crows were making noise. It sounded like hooves hitting rocks on the stream. I started crying because I was really young. The houses there are made of clay and tree trunks, so sometimes you can see out them walls, and that night traumatized me. My grandpa, through all this, was acting strange, trying to reassure me nothing was wrong. But this was really suspicious, because he slept with a rifle next to him. One time, a door to my house's office slammed open when I woke up at 6 a.m. Naturally, it slowly opens on its own due to weight distribution. It takes about 8 seconds to fully open, but it slammed open like it was forced. It was 6 a.m. in the middle of winter, so no windows were open to create a draft, and everyone was asleep. I was too tired for ghostly BS, so I peed and went back to sleep. I was stargazing with my family and noticed a satellite moving slowly across the sky. My uncle says, oh, there's another, and points at another light moving slowly across the sky. Then my aunt goes, wow, look, how many? Points to a cluster of 15 to 20 white dots. Looked like a bunch of satellites, slowly moving in a cluster together across the sky. Wow, that's weird. We all collectively agreed as we watched this cluster of unknown lights move across the sky. Then they came to a dead stop instantly. The lights then began to slowly move around each other until they eventually were in a single line across the sky, then slowly faded away into the darkness. We still have no idea what the hell they were. The only thing that makes me know is we weren't seeing things, is all 6 of us saw this happening. It was in the summer of 2015, Sun River, Oregon. I know a lot of people have had similar experiences, mostly people from the same area and neighboring states. Also in Germany, Australia, the UK, British Columbia, and Spain. I lived in an old house in a small town growing up, and there were quite a few strange things that happened while my family was there. The first thing I remember being creepy about that place is waking up in the middle of the night when I was 6 years old, having to pee really bad. I climbed down from the top bunk bed and turned to see an old man in a rocking chair sitting by the door. I tried to wake my sister up in the bottom bunk, but she wouldn't wake up, and I remember her almost being dead weight. I gathered up the courage to run by the man out the door, fell asleep in the bathroom with the light on, and got in trouble with my mom in the morning. My dad also told us he thought there was something wrong with the place because he kept hearing kids playing and laughing when he'd get ready for work in the morning. He woke up around 4 a.m. for work and would leave around 5:30. He told my mom he heard laughing around the corner of the kitchen in the hallway one morning, went to see if it was one of us kids. Once he turned the hall, he saw a glimpse of someone running around in the far corner of the living room. He followed this kid running till he was back in the kitchen. We checked our rooms. We were all sound asleep. My mom also said she would sometimes see someone staring at her out of the corner of her eye if she was alone. Knowing all of this, when we were older, we would try to scare our friends that came over. One day, my friend brought her Furby. This was the late 90s. And we were playing with it in the bedroom. It started acting weird, sounding effed up like the batteries were draining. It shut off with its eyes closed and wouldn't respond anymore. I said to my friend we had batteries downstairs we could get. As we were leaving the room, the Furby in hand suddenly popped its eyes open and said, "Hee hee, I tricked you." And we just screamed and dropped it. Wasn't the only weird thing with a toy that happened. My mom always told people a story about a toy I had as a baby as well. It was one of those toys that talked when you pressed its hand and said things like, "I love you" and "let's be friends." One night, I was sleeping and the toy kept going off and repeating, "I love you, I love you, I love you." My mom thought it was glitching and went to remove the batteries. When she opened the back, there was nothing inside. She ended up throwing that toy in the garbage. There were a few other weird things that happened there. I will always believe that house is incredibly haunted. About 7 or 8 years ago, I visited a friend a few cities over. They live in a fairly rural area with some forested area behind their house. It was house, then 30 feet to a fence, then maybe 200-ish feet beyond the fence is this forested area. My friend and his family claimed spooky crap happened in this forest area, but I didn't believe it. Nevertheless, this kind of thing really fascinates me. So while I don't believe in paranormal or supernatural, it's still interesting to humor the thought. I brought a hat with me when I stayed with them. It was a black hat with Jimi Hendrix's signature embroidered on it. My favorite hat of all time. I was told by my friend if I tossed the hat beyond the fence, not necessarily into the forest area, it'd appear or close to their house. So I did. Tossed it over the fence one night, and lo and behold, in the morning, it was on their front porch. Whatever. Anyone could have done that. Nothing spooky about that. I tried it again a couple times with the same end result. On their porch or by my belongings indoors each time. And each time monitoring my friend in the process to make sure he doesn't grab it or move it. Whatever. His brother or sister might be in on it. I took one of my friend's items unbeknownst to him, a belt buckle, and threw it over the fence, noting where I tossed it so I could grab it later. I didn't have to, because it suffered the same fate, on the porch, a couple hours later. This one confused me, but I was still skeptical and chalked it up to one of their family members seeing me and doing it. This all culminated when my friend and I went into the forest area one night. We brought flashlights and I wore my hat. After a few minutes in, the flashlights went out at the same time. He stopped and told me to run back. I didn't question him. There might be a wild animal or something, and I don't care to get bit or harmed. So I bolted. To note that he sprinted a few seconds before I, so he had a measurable head start in the process. I dropped my hat. I didn't care. I just ran. When we got back inside the house, my hat was waiting for me in the suitcase. No one was with us, especially no one could grab my hat, and went the long way back to his house faster than us. My friend didn't grab it either, since he was already gone when I dropped it. To compound this, we were the only ones at the house that night, and it was locked. I still don't understand to this day, but I did leave my hat with him, half wishing it would appear at home several 100 kilometers away, but no dice. Some other weird stuff happened, but that was the biggest example of weirdness. The Silver Tic Tac. It was in 2010 over Olympia, or at least from my vantage point. That's what it looked like. I was in a boat on Henderson Bay with my parents, so there are 2 people who believe me. We saw this silvery, ovalish thing flying at about incredible speeds. One second it'd be over the city, the next it'd be over the Olympics. It did this, dancing back and forth, juking and jigging, and then finally just pausing on a dime over the city. It went vertical and just vanished. The thing that unnerved my dad was the fact that it was silent. He's a retired engineer and said we would be hearing sonic booms at the speed the thing was moving at. The way it flashed between the city and the Olympics was unreal. It was broad daylight, no clouds. Then 8 years later, I see what looks like the same thing on Hornet footage. I don't know what we saw, but it broke the laws of physics, as I understand them. So this happened to a coworker of mine, but I was there for the aftermath, and I'm the only one who believed him. We were opening a hotel, and there's random crap that's always happening. Things moving, weird noises, the usual. The particular coworker was always spooked by it and honestly thought the place was haunted. Well, one day, he was going room to room to hook up the TVs, and while laying under a desk struggling to get the TV going, the door to the room slammed shut. He had it propped open with a doorstop, which he swears was tightly secured. Naturally, he got super freaked out, so he figured he would finish the room he was in and then take a break. He had just reached behind the TV when all of a sudden, "Help me, Rhonda," started blasting on his iPhone. He hadn't been playing music or anything. It just started. Freaked out, he ran down to the lobby to tell the rest of us what happened, but everyone chalked it up to him just being paranoid. I believe, dude. I believe. One of my best friends of all time, rest in peace, buddy, and I bonded pretty hard over our similar insomnia patterns, and knowing the other would probably be awake, we'd usually text each other around 1 or 2 a.m. Having nothing else to do, we'd usually drive around town talking about random crap like movies or stories relating to songs on the radio. One night, our driving path led to this new subdivision kind of outside the city limits. It was off a main highway, probably a mile or two east of town, where all the subdivisions had generic names and all the houses were different shades of the same crap brown or gray. So we pulled into this random subdivision. The first thing we noticed was the lack of streetlights. Usually these new subdivisions were lit out the ass, but this one wasn't, which was weird. Then we turned a corner and noticed, I don't know, at least 75% of the occupants' houses on this block were just effing randomly standing out in their front yards with the lights out at 2 a.m. Just WTF. They weren't even doing anything, just standing there. We obviously immediately left. I've gone back to the place in broad daylight a couple of times. It just looks like a normal neighborhood. I don't know what we saw, but I know we both saw it. My wife and I were driving up through northern Arizona on Highway 89 between Flagstaff and Page. It was about 1 a.m. as we were on third shift at the time and often drove at night to avoid traffic. I saw a few sets of eyes glowing in my headlight a little ways up the road, so I let off the gas, slowing down to avoid an animal in the road. When we drove by, we saw several dogs, coyotes, on the side of the road, and I hit the gas and drove by. After we passed, my wife said one of them was running next to the car. I looked over and saw it as well, probably 20 feet off the shoulder of the road. I floored it and looked over as it stood up on its hind legs, that's the only way I can describe it, and kept pace with us for a couple seconds before turning away from the road and disappearing. The whole event probably lasted no more than 10 seconds, but is seriously the most terrifying 10 seconds of my life. This was probably 20 years ago. We still rarely talk about it. I was dozing on the couch at my parents' place last year. Not comfortably because I was cold. Then I felt a wave of heat pass over me, which was pleasant enough until I felt these firm, pointed fingertips on my head, like something was standing behind me with its hands on my scalp. I was frightened, but then grabbed them and threw them off of me. A few minutes later, my mom came in and said she heard a door open and got a feeling that she should check up on me. Probably a dream, but it was still super creepy. When I was about 12 or 13, I woke up in the middle of the night and smelled my father's cologne. Thought it was a little odd since he lived about an hour away, but was too tired to care. Went back to sleep, woke up the next morning, and for some reason, my mother didn't wake me up for school. My father had passed away the night before. Never told anyone for years about that night, but around the age of 23, I told my mom she was glad to know that she wasn't crazy. That same night, she got startled awake, and the dog was staring at the door wagging his tail, almost like he was saying goodbye. before fully leaving. I was out with my friends and came home pretty late. I didn't want my parents asking questions, so I snuck in through the garage. The door was locked, but I had a key. I turned the key to unlock it, but then I heard an abrupt snap, and the door locked again. I repeated this 3 times. Each time I unlocked the door relocked. Exasperated, I cried out, "Mom, it's me!" Then I heard the door unlock. I opened the door and no one was there. When I was young, from time to time, I would see a man in a top hat in the basement of my childhood home. My mother never believed me and told me I was imagining things, and accused me of being on drugs when I was a teenager when I mentioned that I saw him. I hadn't seen him until I was in Crete 15 years later. The question lingers in my mind to this day. Who or what? I was playing on my computer, which is upstairs in my house. My wife had went out for the night with her sisters. My dog started going crazy, which made me think my wife had pulled in the driveway. I waited to hear her get to the front door and come inside, but my dogs kept barking for a couple minutes. I got a little worried, so I decided to see what the fuss was about. My dogs were located on top of the stairs and barking down to the front door. As I turned the corner to go downstairs, I spotted a figure looking upstairs in the darkness. I yell, "What the F?" and run to get my phone in my office. As I get my phone, my dogs go crazy. They frantically try to back up on the wood floor and kind of just spin their wheels. I look at them, and their heads follow movement coming up the stairs and over the railing into the guest bedroom. My dogs reposition themselves and are looking within the bedroom. My dogs are absolute sweethearts. My boy Walter had his fangs out in a way I've never seen, like a wolf. My girl Ellie is around 9 months old, and she's barking as hard as she could while pissing herself. I stood there in shock at their reactions when all of a sudden a noise very similar to buffering noise experienced in a car with only 1 or 2 windows rolled down. That goes on for maybe 15 seconds. Once it stops, my dogs stop barking as well and run into the guest room and are looking for something. We've had weird things happen in our house, but this was the worst. What made the night even more awful was that I was mocked by my wife and her sisters when I asked for her to come. She believes me now, but at the time it was horrible. One time, I was working at a used cars dealer. On the side lot, there was this huge sliding door that led to the car bays to work on them. One night, I got off really late. I dropped off some cars at an auction, picked up another, and had to drop it off before going home. It was almost 10 at night. It's dark and quiet on the street. I look toward the side gate and see under the sliding door and above the door lights and shadows. They look like people are dancing and moving around. I start walking toward it and I hear voices like a party is going on back there. It's really weird because the building setup wouldn't allow lights or shadows from nearby buildings to cast lights or shadows there. So I get closer to take a look. I go by a rectangle about 4 inches by 5 inches. It's cut out, able to reach in and unlock the gate and lock up. I look in and it's pitch black and totally silent, how it should be. I take a few steps back away from the hole and again see the lights and shadows and the talking and everything. I go near the hole again and again it's totally pitch black. I go to my car and start driving away and see the lights and shadows again. I told my boss to check the cameras. He said he didn't see anything, but he did see my shadow under the door when I walked by. 3:30 a.m. My buddy and I spent the night repoing cars. We pull up to the light in Manchester, New Jersey at 527 and 70, going straight. In the left turn lane, getting on to 70 East, a blue 9798 Honda CR-V. The person driving had no face, just blank, like the green man from Always Sunny, or No Face from Dick Tracy. My buddy and I both saw it. Nobody believed it. About a year ago, I was watching some movies late at night when I got hungry and went downstairs for a snack. My room is across from my daughter's room, and her door was open. As I was coming back upstairs, I started turning left towards my room when I hear, clear as ever, "Daddy, "Can you close the door?" I turn around and don't say much and just close it. Once I'm back in my room, I lie down to watch TV when it hits me. My daughter isn't there. She's spending the night at my parents'. I get up and go to her room, and sure enough, it's empty. I woke up my wife, and she thinks I'm crazy. Says I'm probably tired, and maybe it was the TV. I remember the voice so clear, coming in the direction of her room. It's very possible that it was just my head playing games, but it definitely made me question a few things. When I was about 15 years old, school night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I remember looking at the clock. It was 1:30 a.m. I went to the kitchen to make some hot tea to take to bed with me. Now, our kitchen was attached to the dining room, which was a step down from the kitchen. The kitchen and the dining room both had large sliding glass doors and big windows facing the backyard, all on the same wall. The cabinets and counter where we kept the tea was opposite the wall of the windows and made a little corner. I remember walking into the kitchen with the lights off, going to the tea corner of the kitchen, and standing in the corner looking at the windows and sliding glass doors. I felt like someone was watching me through them. I got that gut feeling. You know the one. I stood there for a minute, very still, maybe so they wouldn't see me if I didn't move. Then I went back to my room without making the tea. When I got back to my room, the clock read 5 a.m. I had been standing in the kitchen for 3.5 hours. I had no idea how that was possible, because it only felt like a minute. To this day, it's still the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. My mom never believed me when I told her, because she never felt anything bad in our house. I never did either, but that night I absolutely did. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I shared a bunk bed with my brother. This bunk bed was an old wooden one, extremely heavy but sturdy. I slept on the bottom bunk. I was taking an afternoon nap and vividly remember having a nightmare where I was running from something evil, and it kept hurling boulders and rocks at me, trying to crush me. Finally, I look up and see a giant rock, almost shaped like an anvil, crashing down on top of me. I woke up in a cold sweat and quickly rolled out of bed. I didn't take more than 3 steps when the top bunk broke and crashed down on the side where my head had been. Myself, my wife, and kids were driving near some cliffs where we live. We stopped to take in the view and some photos. I lined the kids up with the cliff drop and ocean behind them and took some pics. As they stepped back from me to get a better picture, they fell off the edge of the cliff. I woke up sweating and petrified. The nightmare felt so real. One of those that really stick with you. I went for a pee and checked in on all the kids, all fast asleep in bed, apart from my youngest 5-year-old daughter. She was on the floor. She had fallen out of bed, but somehow was still sleeping. Next to her, on the floor, knocked over, I assume when she fell, was a bedside lamp. The bulb from the lamp had burnt. It was singeing into the carpet. I think it was ready to burst into flames. My friend's grandma's house was right up against the cemetery. He always told me it was haunted. He would see crazy stuff there, but I never believed him. One night, we were over her house, and I swear I saw something the size of a toddler run from the living room, through the dining room, and into the kitchen. When I looked at my friend, he just went, "Did you just see that kid run through the effing house?" It looked more like a fast-run shadow than the actual person. There was no one there. There were no kids around. It was his grandma's house, and we were the only ones over. It was late at night, no doors open or closed. When we told his grandma, she was just like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It happens all the time." After that, I started believing in ghosts. My friend also said he used to sleep there. He used to push the spare room's TV away from him so it faced away, because he would wake up at night and see people in a reflection staring back at him, watching him sleeping. Scared the crap out of him. I don't know what it was because I don't remember it, because I was a baby toddler, but my mom certainly does and mentions it occasionally. I was her first kid. When I was born, my parents lived in a little old house in Scotland. Mom says really quite often, both I and the dog would stop whatever we were doing at the same time and both look towards the stairs, as if we were watching something either descend or ascend them. This was corroborated by my dad and a few of their friends who saw it happening. It's basically their friend group's weird, inexplicable story. I just happen to be an unwitting part of it. Unfortunately, I have no memory of this, and the dog in question died 30 years ago, so they'll never get their answer. I was walking through the Rockies and managed to tear the muscle on the side of my foot, so I was hobbling back. I was on my own, like a moron. In the space of hobbling back to Jasper, I saw a white bear. I think they're called spirit bears, just sitting, watching me. I literally thought, F's sake, I'm going to die here mauled by a bear. Nobody knows where I am. But it just sat there and pawed the dirt in the direction of town. I limped on, keeping an eye on it, and it just watched me. Then I swear to God, no more than 5 minutes later, an effing wolf appears limping exactly on the same foot I'm limping on, eyes me up, and continues on its journey. I think I was even too pathetic to bother with the moral of that story. I was petrified, though, either way. When I was 16, I skipped school to stay home and play video games. I set up my PlayStation and made some Hot Pockets. Right when I get good and comfortable, I hear footsteps walking to my room. I glance outside and see my parents aren't home yet, but was still afraid I was going to get caught. Seeing no place to hide, I froze. Suddenly, the door flung open, and I heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the house. I must have sat there petrified in the room for half an hour before going outside, waiting for my parents to come home. I tried to explain to my friends later what happened, but they thought I was just pulling some BS from the internet. When I was a teenager, I used to keep the remote to my stereo on the lip of my bed frame. One night, around midnight, I woke up to my stereo playing Static at me. Only it was getting louder. I could see the volume number moving higher and higher. So it's pitch black, and the static is getting louder and louder, and the remote wasn't in its usual place for some reason. I had no choice but to jump out of bed and turn it off. I turned on the light, freaked out, found it. Under my bed, like deep under the bed, at the middle part, super hard to reach. I did not like that at all. It was the night before my stepmom died. She lost her bout of cancer. I was 22, was spending the night in bed with my 9-year-old brother, cuddling him and telling him his mom was going to be okay. It wasn't going to hurt anymore. It's about 3 a.m. at the time, and after a while he immediately sits upright in bed and smiles. Says, "I promise to be a good boy, Mommy. I love you." Now my stepmom has been bedridden for the last month. She's not moving anywhere. But I swear on my life, my little brother agrees with me. For a split second, I saw her standing in the doorway, wearing her big, giant fur coat, just smiling at us, and just looking relieved. Brother went to sleep about 2 minutes later. I left to go to my dad and stepmom's room to check on her to see if my dad's awake, and telling me she died about a half hour ago. I genuinely believe she stopped by on her way to the other side to check in on her 2 kids and make sure we'd be okay without her before she left. I'm in Scotland. Back in the 80s, several people in a small town called Bonnybridge claimed to have seen strange lights in the sky. Bonnybridge is not far from any major town, nor is it in any way isolated, yet sightings were confined to there alone. My mom is from Yucatan, Mexico, and I remember visiting when I was younger, and my uncle telling me about an indigenous tribe living in the mountains with roots tracing back to the Mayans. They told old stories of aliens in the sky that guided the Mayas to Mexico and provided them with knowledge of the universe. Apparently, the ritual of communicating with the aliens was still being practiced by some elders in the tribe. The weird thing was that the town was nearest the tribe was a known hotspot for alien abduction stories, where people would mysteriously disappear for days and suddenly return with no memory of ever being gone. In Germany, we have a town called Bielefeld that's on every map but does not exist in reality. I'm from Arizona and grew up with lots of weird crap. About 2 years ago, I moved to Norway. I quickly learned about the Hessdalen lights that no one can explain, but they show up on a regular basis. From what I read, they're similar to Marfa, Texas lights. In Romania, we have the Hoia Bacu Forest, which is said to be haunted. The trees in it grow at a very weird angle, somewhat curled, and there's some type of magnetic field because phones and flashlights run out of battery very fast in it. In Ireland, we have fairy forts, holy healing wells, banshees, and lots of stories of unusual events, particularly with ghosts and relatives. My grandpa was born in Thurles, and we always heard the old tales he was raised with. When he passed, my mom stopped at my uncle's to tell him, and before she could say a word, he said, "I know, I heard her," referencing the banshee. He swears to this day he heard her wail. I heard the weirdest sound of my life from the field across my house a couple years ago. It was a wailing sound. I have no idea what it was. My guess, it was just a cat getting rogered. But beyond that possibility, I'm at a loss. In the Philippines, we have things like the ballet drive where you people tend to experience meeting apparitions, the white lady with black hair and bloodshot eyes. We have a thing called Nuno Saponso, or dwarves in a small mound, where if you don't ask permission from them, they curse you with different pains in your body, from reddening of your balls to swelling of your arms. Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they got along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she'd complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often they would stay there all night long. The young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do. And when it came to alligators, there just weren't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into town from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and 2 little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and her sons, she said. They wanted her to live with them, but she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put in a hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband and boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell us about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was 1 big alligator and 2 small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here. Hey, I'm Connor from Bigfoot Anon, and I'm always on the hunt for the next big adventure. When you're on the trail for long hours, you build up quite the stench, enough to drive any skunk ape or yeti away. Luckily, I'm on the quest now for the solution to all my problems. Yeti bars. They do exist. Available in tons of different scents and fragrances. Check out YetiBars.net for more and use my code BA10 for a special offer. Clean like a beast. Yeti Bars!
flesh of the unguided and non-believers fuel this void.
Creatures over there! You have to beware! Please!